everyone. So this is our discussion for the passages, the CSAT questions, passages for your ANUBHAV paper. This is for your second ANUBHAV test which had taken place. Alright, so before we get started with analyzing the questions and looking at the questions, I just wanted to give you a quick overview. Level of difficulty was easy to moderate of the verbal passages. Most of the questions that were asked were inference type, as in the predominant questions were inference type. The other question types that are frequently asked by UPSC were also included. Assumption questions were included, summary questions were included, main point questions were included, authors, reasoning based questions such as author's opinion. So all these question types have been asked in the test. So now before we start, I want to point out that you should, from the point of view of, since this is ANUBHAV, you are trying to experience how these questions are asked in the exam. I want you to keep a track of how many questions in inference, assumption, summary, main point, author's opinion, how many questions do you get right or wrong in each question type. The reason is, as you proceed towards the exam, you should have a clear idea of your strengths and weaknesses, and I expect you to check question type wise in every paper or every test you take. So that way you know what is your strength, what is your weakness. You don't really want to generally solve a set of questions and then feel like, oh, I didn't score that well, I didn't score, or I scored really well. You should base it on either the type of questions that you solve, or you should base it on, which brings me to my second point, you should base it on evidence. So the thing that you want to remember, and this is a brief overview before we see today's questions, right? I'll write it down here. So the reason why I'm speaking about this part of using evidence to select your answers, these are just a few pointers I need to make before we start with the actual questions. Verbal is based on evidence. Passages are based on evidence. We often take it to mean that it's actually based on, subjective, like maybe if I say, I think I feel the passage says something, someone else feels the passage says something else. That is not, firstly, that is not how those questions are designed. Those questions are designed in a way in which only one answer can come up. So we are supposed to be evidence oriented. That means we are supposed to look for specific reasons to find the main point of the author, specific reasons. Specific reasons, when I say, these are actual words that are guiding my decision. I'm not making my decisions based simply on a description of the option. I'm guiding my decisions based on actual words and options. And then you can eliminate your way to the right answer choice. So have a evidence-based, evidence-oriented outlook. That's the first thing that you want to keep in mind. Okay. Now the other thing that you want to keep in mind when it comes to these questions is, apart from having this evidence-based outlook, is that in terms of maintaining accuracy throughout the passage, in terms of maintaining accuracy throughout those 25 questions, you need to be able to identify the level of difficulty of questions, right? So maybe out of 25 questions, you don't feel like solving certain questions immediately. Maybe there is benefit in solving them later. So these are the three markers, three markers of level of difficulty. First is length of sentences. If you see a passage with long sentences, that's a problem. Then second is difficult words, meaning just words which are difficult to know, vocabulary is hard. And third is new concepts, which is different from difficult words. Some completely new concept is discussed. So these three are the ways in which the examiner can make the passage difficult or option difficult. To mark the level of difficulty of a particular question, I expect students to have the ability to maybe go through a question for a brief period of time. To check this, you don't need to invest more than 10 to 15 seconds. So whether you want to decide whether to solve a question or not, you can decide based off of these three markers. So I have told you to be evidence oriented, and I've told you to decide which type of passages to solve, which to solve later, so on and so forth. Now with each question type that we solve, I'll also briefly discuss the logic of how an inference question works, an assumption question works, etc. So let's now proceed to the discussion at hand. So as you can tell here, directions for the following 4 items, there's one passage only from which we are supposed to answer 4 questions. Now this was a passage about metaphors, alright. It's a slightly long passage, so reading up on the screen will be a little difficult for some of you all, but we just want to right now pay attention to what the main point of the author is. Remember, everything that is written in the exam, every passage that we find in the exam, every passage is going to have one main point. You can call this central argument, central idea, whatever else you want to refer it to, that's okay, but it will have one main point, right, which will be maybe mentioned in these 3 places. So we need to identify that main point, and that is especially important we do it for the long passages. Now let's look at this long passage. This long passage is essentially about metaphors. It introduces what metaphors are. It's a poetic device. Alright, metaphor is a poetic device that deals with comparison. So metaphors are used to compare objects. It compares similar qualities. Now the author explains all of this through one example, which is love is a rose. So if you notice, it's comparing love and roses. Although this does not sound particularly rich image, metaphor can communicate so much about a particular image. It is another type of figurative language. Now, why are poets using this device? This is because they are experiencing something emotionally at that moment. Therefore, the poet's job is to enable us to experience that feeling. So how do they do that? They use a metaphor that helps people compare or understand. Now, the author then in the second half of the passage, the author analyzes this metaphor of love is a rose. And then we are told love has thorns, roses have thorns, similarly love also can have some pain, and etc. etc. So the comparison between the rose and love has been made, and the objective of this is to tell us how there is artistry and joy in a simple metaphor, right? What a simple metaphor can communicate in just few words, right? So the impact of metaphors is shown in the second half of the passage. Alright, so we know what the passage is about. Now we should proceed to the questions. Okay, now let's take a look at these questions. If you notice, the main idea of this passage is, the question is trying to ask you the main idea, right? The main idea of this passage is poetic devices are necessary for poets. Like I said, our decision should be specific. They are necessary for poets is invalid. Nowhere has been in the passage has it been said that the poets require metaphors to communicate. Poetry must never cater to the senses. If you notice, poetry in this case is catering to the senses. You hold the rose, you smell the rose, etc. etc. So it's catering to the senses. Always use words that create one specific image. This is not true, right? The main idea of the passage is always use words that create one specific image. This is not true. Main idea of the passage is metaphors are useful to poets. Ideally, that should be the main idea. Metaphors are useful to poets. But options A, B, C don't work. So metaphor is a great poetic device. We have to accept that. We can't, the author doesn't really say metaphor is one of the better poetic devices. Other poetic devices are not as good, etc. etc. But still option D is correct because none of the other options work. Alright, let's see question number 2 now. This is an inference based question from the metaphors, right? It can be inferred that a metaphor is which of the following. So a type of figurative language, we found this in the passage. The only poetic device, this is extreme, therefore invalid. Metaphors are not precise enough, this is invalid. The author calls them incredibly precise in terms of their ability to communicate emotions, etc. And a type of flower, this is just playing on the examples in the passage. So B, C, D are invalid. A is the correct choice for this question. The benefit of long passages usually is your accuracy for those 3 or 4 questions is slightly higher because you get to see the passage multiple times. Okay. It can be inferred that the true meaning of love is a rose is what? So what is the meaning of the metaphor? We are being asked to make an inference the meaning of the metaphor, love is a rose, right? So love is a true joy. Love is a true joy is invalid. The author in the end said metaphors can communicate great joy, right? But love is a true joy is invalid. B, love comes only once in a lifetime, invalid. Love is never permanent, invalid. This, I am invalidating these because inferences require us to have some evidence before we can say it's a valid inference or invalid inference. So D, love is a combination of good and bad experiences. This comes from the second half of the passage, right? Rose has thorns, rose also has beauty. So rose has pain and beauty. Similarly, love is a combination of good and bad. So D is the correct choice for question number 3. Alright. The one thing that I want to bring up here is D is the right choice. What is an inference? I just want you to remember this example. You can infer something based on putting together two pieces of evidence, dark clouds and water everywhere, right? So suppose you see dark clouds and water everywhere. You step out of your house and you suddenly see dark clouds in the sky and water everywhere. You put two facts together, A plus B together, and you infer that it has rained. This is what an inference is. An inference is a conclusion we make on the basis of some facts. You can now make conclusions based on one fact also, or two facts, or three facts. In this case, both these facts are required for this conclusion. I can't infer that it has rained just based on water everywhere or just based on dark clouds. I need both of them to infer that it has rained. Keep that idea in mind. Like I said, I'll quickly discuss these ideas when we come to those questions. Passage 1, question 4. According to the passage, the poet's intention. What is the poet's intention? Objective kya hai? To release anger, not disgust. To announce heartache, not disgust. Mixed example here. The love is a rose, so it has some ache, some heart. Heartache is invalid. D, to reward the senses. Rewarding the senses is not the poet's intention. C, to enable you to experience the poet's point of view. This is why the poet is writing the metaphor. This we can tell from the first paragraph in the passage, right? Enable us to experience it, to feel it, right? Okay. So now let's see the second set. So as you can tell, long passage was in this case easier. We'll look at the second set of questions. Okay. So let's start with this. This is asking us which one of the following is the essential message implied by the above passage. Now let's look at the passage. Incentives are driving India's EV adoption. So incentives are helping us with EV adoption, right? Electric vehicle adoption. What will be needed? Finance will be critical to achieving scale. So if you want to make sure EV technologies are used by your industries, finance will be critical. However, real perceived risks of new asset class. So people are afraid of this new asset class, which is electronic vehicles. So that has meant that financial institutions के लिए ये नया asset class है, electronic vehicles. So for them, they have not yet built up their confidence or capabilities. So these institutions are not yet confident in giving loan to a electronic vehicle, etc. So what is the essential message? अब author ने passage में ये कहा है कि EV adoption के लिए क्या ज़रूरी है? Finance is required. Finance मिलने में क्या problem है? Not yet confident of giving finance. Banks are not yet confident of giving finance. Alright, so let's see which of them is valid. As you can tell, all of these options have some problem. A has the problem of, for the EV sector to achieve scale, financial institutions should be encouraged to hand out loans. It's not about encouraging them to hand out loans. Many students have gone with option A, okay? It's not about encouraging to hand out loans. The problem is, essential message is that banks have not yet built up their confidence or capabilities. चलो confidence तो एक बात हो गई, but suppose there is no capability and I ask them to hand out loans, that will be a bad loan, that can be a faulty loan. So the real problem is that we need to develop this capability of these institutions like banks to give finance, right? Capabilities of institutions like banks to give finance. This is what the main essential message should look like. So A is invalid. B, depend upon the country to pursue innovations. EV adoption and scalability depend upon the country to pursue innovations, not discussed in this field. Pursuing innovation is mentioned in the passage, but it depends upon whether we pursue innovation or not. This has not been discussed in the passage, so B is invalid. C, the government should step in to finance the EV sector. This government should step in, not discussed, right? So D is the correct choice for financing the EV segment. Financial institutions need to develop capabilities. These capabilities are missing. They don't know whether that thing is risky or not. They don't know whether to give loan or not. So D is the correct choice. All right. Let's start with this. Now here we are being asked implications, which of them are valid implications. Now few firms profit from IPR, right? Very few firms profit from IPR connected to GM foods. Since businesses may now claim a patent on a whole species by modifying a single gene, this raises questions regarding seed sovereignty. Because a few firms profit and they own that thing, it raises the questions regarding seed sovereignty. Right? Once any of these types are made public, India will see severe unrest. This would be contrary to the efforts made by our ancestors to co-evolve species during millions of years. So we are told that if this is done, India can see severe unrest, IPR unrest. Okay? So we are told evolutionary reason that this is not a good idea. We are told societal reason why this is not a good idea. So let's see which of these is a valid implication. So one, using seeds which are genetically modified by corporations can impair species diversity. Right? This was a little difficult for students to identify. Can impair species diversity. If you notice, we are told firms who have these seeds, right? These seed sovereignty, right? These would be contrary. Contrary would mean opposite. Opposite to co-evolved species. Right? So the species which co-evolved during evolution, this act of owning seeds and then transmitting those owned seeds can be negative, right? It can be contrary or opposite or negative. So this tells us that using seeds which are genetically modified can impair species diversity is valid. Second, we need to conduct independent studies. This need to conduct independent studies we can't infer because it's not implied anywhere. So 2 is invalid. 3, the technologies which can edit one gene within a genome are owned only by a few corporations. Now, isme a lot of students have gone with A also and with C also. We'll see if 3 follows. Okay. Technologies which can edit one gene within a genome are owned only by a few corporations. This only by a few corporations own it is one problem. So let's check. We are told a few firms or few organizations profit from the intellectual property rights and technology connected to GM foods. So few firms profit and have the technology. Now let's see, the technologies which can edit one gene within a genome are owned only by a few corporations. So we can say a few corporations profit, but it's not said that only a few corporations profit, right? So owned only by this is invalid. So the reason why only is required is, according to the passage, a few firms profit from IPR and technology, but this technology can technically be owned by the government also, right? It could be owned by multiple bodies, research institutes could own it. So we can't say it's owned only by a few corporations. It could be the technology could be owned by multiple. The profits are accrued by a few. All right, so C is the correct choice for this question. All right, let's look at the next one. Okay, so we have again a slightly longer passage. A cycle of floods followed by drought that lasted for a large portion of 20th century. This cycle of floods led the Egyptian government to build a dam, right? So we know of this Aswan Dam, you would have read about it. So so that Aswan Dam will give agriculture, will give electricity, etc., etc. वो सब आ जाएगा. Most Egyptian communities had electricity by the 1970s. Aswan Dam supplied. So we are told success of Aswan Dam. These advantages were offset by negative long-term efforts. So we are told the advantages जो भी थे, they were offset by long-term effects. Long-term effects were negative. Now, for example, say long-term negative effects दे रखे हैं कि prevents silt deposition. This has affected nutrients in the land. This has led to fertilizer use. This has led to chemical pollution. This has caused animal and plant populations to be affected. It is difficult to draw definite conclusions about a project with such profound varied results, but it would be untenable to assert that the Egyptian government should never have built the Aswan Dam. तो author ये कह रहा है कि Egyptian government should never have built the Aswan Dam is invalid. मतलब they should have built the Aswan Dam, but whether its impacts are good or bad, that is difficult to assert. The need for Aswan Dam would not have been there. This idea is invalid. It would be untenable means that. All right. Going to the options, question 12, which the passage implies which of the following are the effects of the Aswan Dam. So implication, which is, like I said, it's basically a form of inference. A, crops need silt in order to flourish. So crops need silt in order to flourish also is problematic. Need silt, crops must have silt. This is not implied in the passage. The absence of silt has caused loss of mineral nutrients, but it's not like they need silt to flourish. Flourish also doesn't mean simply grow. Flourish means like a bumper crop. वो भी गलत हो जाएगा, right? So B, farmers are glad that the dam was built because the river no longer floods. So river no longer floods, therefore farmers are glad that the dam was built. ये दोनों गलत है because the farmers are unhappy. Their situation has gotten a little difficult because of the fertilizers that they need to use. So it's not like they are glad. And the river does no longer flood. This also we can't state from the passage. Option D, Egypt now competes successfully on economic level. Now competes successfully, completely beyond scope. C is the correct choice. The land around the river is not as naturally fertile as was before the dam was built because we are told nutrients lacking. So when you say the land is not as naturally fertile, this is what an implication or inference is when connecting nutrients lacking with this. C is the correct choice for question number 12. Alright, what is the significance of the author's statement that the dam generated half of Egypt's output of electricity by 1970s? तो ये statement, second half statement का significance क्या था? So A, it proves Egypt no longer needed to rely. ये prove तो नहीं किया on external source of electricity. D, it shows that the dam fell short of initial expectations. It actually seems to be meeting initial expectations. Falling short तो हुआ नहीं. C, it argues that the positive energy output is more important than any negative effects. So it argues that only positive energy output is beneficial. The negative effects need not be considered. This is untrue. The author in the end says, we don't know if the effects are overall good or bad, but Aswan Dam should have been built. That doesn't mean the author is exactly saying negative effects chal jayenge, right? So C is invalid. B, it demonstrates the magnitude of the positive effects created by the dam. So magnitude of positive effects, half of the power supply came from the dam. Option B is the correct choice for question 13. Alright. Now here's our next set of questions. Next set of questions we are looking for assumptions. In assumptions, I'll discuss how to solve assumptions. First, remember this example for assumptions. An assumption is a necessary link between evidence and reasoning. So it basically means that, let's say, A tells B, go to the market and buy vegetables. ठीक है? This entire sentence. Now from this entire thing, from this entire passage or sentence, we can say B knows the way to the market. Right? B knows the way to the market. How do I know B knows the way to the market? Because the author has, or the original statement says, go to the market, that specific market, right? Market X. So I can say, therefore, B knows the way to the market. So a valid assumption you want to remember is necessary for the passage to exist. ठीक है, इसका मतलब क्या हुआ? If I say B does not know the way to the market, B को market जाने का रास्ता पता नहीं है, so this original statement would be invalidated. Go to the market and buy vegetables. Correct? So that means this is a necessary underlying assumption. Underlying because the logic of it is hidden beneath the statement, so as to speak. Alright. Let's look at the questions, assumption question. All medical professionals agree that we need to concentrate on reducing prevalence of diabetes and management of diabetes. We should focus on these two things. All medical professionals agree. So we start by focusing in our kitchen, revive your kitchen, the diet which you're having, change that diet. But the difficult challenge, the author says, is not the kitchen challenge. The difficult challenge is the attitudinal shift. In many rural and urban areas, physical work is linked with class hierarchy. So the attitudinal shift that is asking people to do movement is not there. So you need to do diet and movement, both. Diet to ho sakta hai, but the author is trying to say that movement is harder as a challenge to implement. Alright. So on the basis of the passage, following assumptions are made. 1. Regular movement and physical work may help prevent diabetes. Now, regular movement and physical work. How do I know this? Now suppose attitudinal shift towards movement is difficult. In many rural and urban areas, physical work is linked with class hierarchy. So therefore they may or may not end up working and may or may not end up protecting their diabetes. So regular movement may help prevent pre-diabetes. This is correct. If I say regular movement does not help, regular movement does not help in preventing pre-diabetes, तो ये सारा गलत हो जाता, right? So this is the way to actually check whether an assumption is valid or not. After you check, after you see that you think it's valid, after you find evidence for it, then you put the word not in it, and you see if you're adding the word not to this, then something in the passage also should get cancelled out. Alright, that is a valid assumption. We'll test this with assumption 2. It is important to manage pre-diabetes in people to prevent it from turning into something more serious. So important to manage ko, if we make it, it is not important to manage. So here we need to concentrate on pre-diabetes and its improving its management. तो ये not कर देता, not important to manage, ये सारा गलत हो जाता, right? So statement 2 also is a valid assumption. So the correct choice is option C. Option C is the correct choice. Alright. So based on the passage, which of the following is the most valid conclusion? We are trying to draw a conclusion. Most valid conclusion. Alright. The government is generating a plethora of gender disaggregated data. So the author is talking about government has gender data. Like according to gender, they have distributed probably different things, health, how policies are providing things, etc. Now, the author says because of this, because we have more data, through we can use it to inform schemes. Like we can make our schemes better. So therefore, we can have a more virtuous cycle. Gather data, make your schemes more useful to people. Now it is the onus on other people, academia, research, third-party assessments of such data to further mainstream women's rights. So the author is saying government is getting good gender data. It can help us do future planning better, our schemes will be better, and third party assessors can actually improve the implementation of women's rights. Alright, so based on the passage, which one of the following is the most valid conclusion? Most valid conclusion is another type of inference. Alright, same thing. So D, gender mainstreaming must seamlessly pervade every sphere of state policy. This was the easiest option to eliminate. Every sphere of state policy was not discussed. Option C is talking about use of data fortifies women's access to economic resources, thus elevating their social status. So use of data fortifies women's access to economic resources. If you notice here, we are discussing that governments are using this to inform their schemes, and now the onus is on other groups to make sure that they can engage in Jan Hit using these data points, right? But nowhere can we say it can specifically elevate their social status, and neither can we say it will make sure that their economic resources will jump up. It can help in women's rights, does not mean that it will help elevating their status. So C is invalid. B, the statistical architecture of the nation as we knew it has been rebuilt to count women. Has been rebuilt to count women. We can't infer this, and this is not a valid conclusion on the basis of this passage. We are probably using some other information, but on the basis of this passage, this could be an invalid conclusion. So we are left with option A. Quantification is a step towards resolution and rectification of women's rights challenges. Quantification because, like I said, we have more data points. So all of these data points can help assessment and improvement and mainstream women's rights. So quantification is a step towards resolution and rectification of women's rights challenges. Option A is the correct choice for this question. All right. Let's see the next one. Okay. So everyone is sensitive to extreme weather conditions. We are looking for the paragraph best supports the statement. So best supports the statement, like I said, is essentially an inference or some form of conclusion we are trying to make. Everyone is sensitive to the extreme weather conditions, but with age, body may become less able to respond to long exposure. So older people might develop hypothermia, they are more prone to it. This passage everyone would have understood. It's easy. Hypothermia is a drop in internal body temperature which can be fatal. So hypothermia is defined, outcome of hypothermia is defined. Now we'll see which option is best supported. Option A, cold weather is more dangerous than warm weather. Now many students have gone with option A. But the real problem with option A is cold weather is dangerous. This is absolutely valid, right? But more than warm, these parts of the option are invalid. More than warm is invalid. The reason why more than warm is invalid is you will say cold se kharab ho raha hai to warm se nahi hoga. That's not the case. If there is an ideal temperature, let's assume there is an ideal temperature, right? So colder is bad. Warm is how good or bad warm temperature is this is unknown to us. This is not told to us. So what if warm weather means like weather where it's 50 degrees every day? We don't know if that's good for old people or not from the passage, right? So A is invalid. B, hypothermia is a condition. Hypothermia is a condition that only affects older people. Only affects older people. Invalid. Easy to eliminate B. C, older people who live in warm climates are healthier. So are healthier than people who live in cold climates. The same reason as we eliminated option A, we eliminate option C. So right choice option D, an older person is more susceptible to hypothermia than a younger person. This is what is stated in the passage. Alright. 23, D is the right answer. Let's look at the next question. We are looking for assumptions. In this case, like I've already mentioned, an assumption is necessary for the passage to exist. So we'll figure out which of these is valid. Gig economy is described to us. What is gig economy? What is the strategy? A huge pool of employees. Gig economy has a huge pool of employees. This pool of employees is directed or matched according to the demand of the market. Shifting demand is then matched with this supply of labor. ठीक है, there is more competition because of this, because of huge pool of people being matched here and there, and this competition forces them to work at low pay, right? Since they work at low pay, the company, the gig company, can then operate at low cost. If the company operates at low cost, then they can own their own monopoly. So the passage is saying a gig economy company is based on huge pool of employees. Huge pool of employees creates more competition. This lowers pay, and lowering of pay allows companies to operate at low cost and then establish their own monopoly. Alright, on the basis of the above passage, following assumptions have been made. 1, if the pool of employees in a gig economy company starts to drop, business can suffer. So how have we figured out business can suffer? Pool of employees in a gig economy here is huge pool of employees. This huge pool of employees will eventually help that company to establish their monopoly, right? Because that company can lower cost, lower pay, etc. So if this pool reduces, if this pool shrinks, right? If this pool of employees shrinks, then business can suffer is valid. If I say business can't suffer, business won't suffer, then this establishing their own monopoly, operate at low cost, all of this will be invalidated. So 1 is valid. 2, gig economy models, if run successfully, can allow a company to dominate the market. Allow a company to dominate the market sounds wrong. Some students have gone with option A, but that's incorrect. Dominate the market is correct based on the fact that they can establish their own monopoly in the market. Monopoly meaning what? They're dominating the market. They're in control of the market. So C is the correct choice for question number 24. Alright, let's look at this set. What is the most rational and crucial message? The main point of the author. What is the author's main point? The author says it is widely believed that understanding history comes from textbooks. Then the author denies that. Understanding history does not come from textbooks. This is not entirely the case. History comes from lived experience. Okay, this includes fiction, non-fiction, television, cinema. History comes from social media, friends, in our daily experience in the form of monuments, ruins, etc. So the places we visit all come together to create the foundation of our working knowledge of history. Everything that we do, this is where all of them create the foundation of the working knowledge of our history. Alright. Okay, now what is the most rational crucial message? A, our understanding of history comes mainly from lived experiences such as jewelry. So mainly from lived experiences such as jewelry, invalid. The ideal main point of the author should be wide belief is understanding comes from textbooks. This is wrong. Understanding comes from our working knowledge of history from all the places we visit. So all these boxes should somehow be represented in an ideal message, correct? Let's see if option A does not do that. Option B, working knowledge of history comes solely from our personal experiences, so invalid. C, our historical worldview is informed by various sources including personal experiences, media and food. So option C is saying it's informed by various sources, but even this is not trying to correct a widely believed thing. So option C also has some things lacking, but option D is entirely incorrect. Our knowledge of history comes from where we learn from our families and our communities. Our knowledge of history comes from what we learn from our families and communities. If you compare option D and option C is saying our historical worldview is informed by various sources, including personal experiences, media and food. So various sources, including personal experiences, tells us that many sources are involved. Option D says our knowledge of history comes from what we learn from our families and communities only. No mention of anything else. So the entirety of option D is incorrect, right? Only likha nahi hai, but there is no mention of anything else. So it is only. Option D is therefore entirely wrong. C is correct. Okay. Let's see the next one. With reference to the above passage, the following could be the most rational practical implications. We are looking for practical implications. Notice here the central bank's guidelines are given to make sure that the lending practices All right. The lending practices are not fair. They have levied a penal interest over and above the contracted rate. तो बैंक ये अलग interest जोड़ के लगा रहे लोगों को, right? So RBI noted this fact. So what RBI did is RBI released this fair lending practice idea. What is the idea of this fair lending practice? The idea is that you should not be able to charge excessive rates of penal interest leading to hardship, etc. So because the borrower will have to repay and the borrower will have losses because of this sort of lending practice. So fair lending practices now lay down that personal charges should be recovered separately. Penal charges should be recovered separately and must not be added either to principal or outstanding. So you need to recover these charges separately. And you can't add them to your initial loan amount. So which of these is the most rational practical implication? Lenders will no longer be able to charge penal interest rate over and above. Will no longer be able to charge. This is because if you notice, RBI has now emphatically laid down that penal charges should not be recovered. So no longer they'll be able to charge. This is valid. Two lenders will have to recover penal charges separately. So recover them separately and must not add them and cannot add them to the principal outstanding or the rate of interest charge, to either principal or rate of interest charge. So directly stated from the passage. 3. Borrowers who were previously charged excessive rates of penal interest may now be able to dispute and potentially reduce them. So again, directly stated, indirectly stated, dispute is coming from the fact that if you notice, there's a specific word, just give me one moment. Disputes, right? Borrowers and disputes. So these disputes which are happening because of excessive rates, these disputes will reduce, right? So borrowers who were previously charged excessive rates or interest may now be able to dispute and potentially reduce their overall repayment amount. So they'll now be able to potentially dispute and reduce because of the new guidelines. So people with existing loans will now be able to protect themselves. That is what statement 3 is saying. It's indirect, but it's true. And 4, credit discipline can improve among borrowers. This is the objective. Credit discipline should improve among borrowers and prevent lenders to behave in a way in which they are legally taking money. They are not extracting money from unsuspecting people. So option D is the correct choice. All the 4 are valid. Let's start with passage 3. Which one of the following statements best sums up? So a summary of the passage involves the entirety of the passage. We are in theory, when we are looking for a summary, we are in theory looking for an option which can completely replace the passage. In this case, however, it's easy for us because the summary of the passage itself is sort of given in the first sentence by the author. 4 key mechanisms that translate a demographic bonus to economic dividend. How do we get demographic bonus to economic dividend? Employment, education, skills, health condition and governance, right? Employment, education, skills, health governance, health conditions and governance. So education, skills, governance, employment, right? So all these factors the author has listed throughout the passage and said, explain to us as to why all of these factors are needed to transform our demographic bonus into an economic dividend. So option D, the education is not important. Education, skills, health conditions, not important. This is opposite of the first sentence. This is not a valid summary. D is invalid. C says the only job creation can ensure that India will realize the demographic dividend. Only job creation can ensure. If you notice, 4 or 5 things are listed, so only job creation is invalid. And B, the key mechanisms to translate demographic bonus into economic dividend are healthcare, job creation, governance. These can help India become a developed country. Not discussed in the passage. So we are left with only option A, which is a rephrasing of the first sentence. The realization of demographic dividend, which is this, in India requires job creation, education, skills, good governance to translate demographic opportunity into economic gains. So only option A includes the words that are marked. Only option A is trying to summarize the author's message. All right. Let's So A is the correct choice here. Let's see the next one. Which one of the following is the most logical corollary? So logical corollary is, look at it like this: which of these most naturally follows the logic of the author, the logic of the passage? Most naturally follows the logic of the passage. Right? That which most naturally follows the logic of the passage. Passage is about empiricism. Empiricism is defined for us. Empiricism is a philosophical approach that emphasizes the importance of evidence. Evidence is important. Similarly, rule of law also is a principle that promotes supremacy of law. So the author is saying rule of law and empiricism are similar or overlapping in some way, right? Both concepts share a common emphasis on importance of evidence. So there is something similar between them. Both are talking about evidence. Then the rule of law requires legal decisions are based on evidence rather than on personal arbitrary preferences. This aligns that empiricist view that knowledge should be based on observation and evidence rather than on speculation or intuition. So this concept of empiricism and rule of law having this focus towards evidence and this avoidance of speculation or intuition, this concept is discussed in the later half of the passage. All right. So option A, which of the following is the most logical corollary? Rule of law stresses the need for experimentation. Need for experimentation is opposite of what is discussed in the passage. So need for experimentation is invalid. B, the rule of law promotes impartiality, objectivity in decision making, which is consistent with empiricist emphasis on speculation. This is invalid. Emphasis of empiricists is on observation and evidence rather than on speculation or intuition. So this is opposite of what is stated in the passage. D says empiricism emphasizes the need for objective and impartial legal decisions based on evidence. Empiricism is not talking about how legal decisions should be made. So option D is combining the two, right? There is an overlap, but empiricism is not saying how legal decisions should be made. Rule of law is not saying how empiricism should behave. That has not taken place. So D is invalid, C is the correct choice. The overlap between empiricism and the rule of law lies in their shared emphasis. Shared emphasis is here, right? On importance of evidence, impartiality, objectivity in decision making. Option C is the correct choice. This is a fairly easy question. All right. Let's get started with this. Based on the passage, which of the following is the most valid implication? Now, most valid implication, like I said, is an inference-based question. We'll go through the passage. Rapid population growth has led to a surge in demand for natural resources. So rapid population growth has led to a surge in demand for natural resources. This increase in demand for natural resources has put immense pressure on our environment, has caused environmental degradation, has put immense pressure on our environment. So the overconsumption of finite resources is also contributing to climate change and exacerbating social and economic inequalities. So we are told the negative impacts that are happening because of this population growth surge in demand. Addressing this challenge, so the author is telling us a solution to this, will require a shift towards sustainable consumption, prioritizing efficiency and conservation. Basically, conserve karo, efficient raho. This is the way we can actually counter this problem. All right. So most valid implication A, rapid population growth will exacerbate, will worsen existing social ills. So possible, but perpetuate. Perpetuate meaning there is no cure. Right? Perpetuate means there is no cure. Some students have gone with A, so I am explaining this. Perpetuate is incorrect because the author is offering a cure. Addressing this will require XYZ. So cure to hai, perpetuate nahi keh sakte. A is invalid. D, environmental degradation and biodiversity loss are irreversible causes of overconsumption. So again, perpetuate jaise irreversible, same problem with both options. C, Indian ecosystems carrying capacity cannot match the demand for natural resources. Carrying capacity not discussed in the passage. Cannot match, not discussed in the passage. Option C is invalid. We're left with B. Shifting towards use of renewable resources can help mitigate. So that is sustainable consumption patterns, which is shifting towards use of renewable resources, can help mitigate social and economic inequalities. This is directly stated. So option B is the correct choice in this question. Let's see the next one. All right, which of the following would be most supported by the author? Most supported by the author, kaun sa isme se? So first let's figure out what the passage is trying to say, what is the author trying to say, then we'll see which can be supported. Independence must mean that the people of India, not of those who are today ruling over them. Independence must begin at the bottom, thus every village must become a republic or a panchayat having full powers. So the author is saying what independence must actually mean, especially what independence must actually mean at the village level. It follows therefore that every village has to be self-sustained and capable of managing its affairs even to the extent of defending itself. So what independence means at the panchayat or village level, right? It means that every village can manage its own affairs. So option D, let's see which of them is most supported. Option D, villages in India should rely on external support. Completely opposite, option D is invalid. C, independence should begin at the top. So should begin at the top, obviously invalid. B, ruling over India is necessary. Ruling over India is necessary, invalid. Independence, all of this is opposite of what the author was saying. A says every village in India should have full powers. So every village in India should have full powers and become self-sustained. This is clearly supported by the author. Every village must become a republic or a panchayat. All right. Very easy question. Let's see the next one. Which of the following is the most logical rational inference? Let's go through the passage. Materials such as steel and cement are important components in construction. They are also heavy CO2 emitters, making decarbonizing these industries a priority. So steel and cement are important, but they are heavy CO2 emitters, so decarbonize them, the author is saying. Right? In the second half of the passage, the author tells us steel production alone accounts for a lot of greenhouse gas emission. A big part of this comes from mining and transportation of the ingredients used. So clearly steel and cement affect the environment and we should therefore start decarbonizing these industries. So let's look at the options to make valid inferences. A, the construction industry is not important for reducing carbon. This is completely opposite, so easy to eliminate. A is invalid. B, the impact of greenhouse gas emissions on mining and transport is undeniable. Now option B is, some students have gone with option B. The passage was talking about impact of mining on greenhouse gas emissions, right? Impact of mining on greenhouse gas emissions. What is option B trying to do? Impact of greenhouse gas on mining. So this is opposite of what is done in the passage, right? Option B is invalid. Some students, I think, if you read option B in a hurry, you might think it's right, but it's actually stating the opposite. Okay, let's look at option C. The steel and cement used in construction must be replaced by sustainable materials. Now we are told in the passage that we should decarbonize, but steel and cement can be replaced या must be replaced. ये दोनों की बात नहीं हुई है. Whether we can actually replace cement with something like plastic, we can't. That no suggestions like this have been recommended. So C is invalid. D, the steel and cement industries are significant contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. This is a fairly clear option. Option D is the correct choice. All right. Let's see the next one. Which of the following is the most rational and logical assumption that can be made on the basis of the above passage? All right. The South Africa-based company has developed AI-enabled bracelets that fit around rhinos' ankles to help conservation teams easily locate animals. So we are told of some company who's come up with these bracelets which will track rhinos. The company's algorithms used machine learning and they spot when an animal is exhibiting abnormal behavior. So the bracelet will tell when the animal is moving in an abnormal way. It might be distressed, it might be because of poachers being there. So these bracelets are being used to protect these animals. That is what is discussed. Which of the following is most rational assumption? Let's look at option A. The use of the bracelets will obviate the need. Obviate the need is essentially saying will no longer require. Will no longer require the traditional conservation methods. So I can't say the use of bracelets will no longer require traditional conservation methods. Option A is therefore invalid. Option B, the bracelets and similar such devices significantly reduce the impact of poachers. Firstly, the passage was talking about one specific bracelet invented by one specific company, right? So bracelets plural and similar such devices significantly reduce impact. This I can't say about other devices. I can't even say about this device that it significantly reduces impact. So all of this is invalid about saying significantly reduces impact. D, the bracelets can accurately determine the exact cause of an animal's abnormal movement patterns. If you notice here, a signal that might be distress, it might be distress. So there's a chance. And here in option D, can accurately identify the exact cause. So this means we are 100% sure. This is, and this is not the same, right? So statement D is invalid. C is the correct choice. Real-time information can help us better understand their movement patterns, right? Can help animals be protected. Both of those would have been valid assumptions. If I said, instead of option C, I said real-time information about an animal's whereabouts cannot help. Cannot help. So this logic that it sends an alert and these teams can then be informed will stop making sense, right? So we are option C is the right choice. Real-time information can help us better understand their movement patterns. All right. All right. Let's start with this question. Which of the following are possible reasons for RBI to raise the risk weights of unrated exposures? So first, let's look at what is being spoken about in the passage. Given extensive use of credit ratings in the assessment of capital adequacy, in the banks, the presence of unrated exposures can create information barriers for banks as well as the supervisor. So extensive use of credit ratings, that group of people who will decide the credit of a particular organization, person, use of those in assessing capital adequacy. If you're using that agency to determine if a person or an entity has adequate capital, the presence of unrated exposures, unrated meaning those which are not rated, they are not rated by credit agencies. So these unrated exposures which are not supported or backed by, approved by other credit agencies, can create information barriers. So unrated exposures are negative, right? Given the prevalence of large unrated exposures in the banking system, the Reserve Bank is now trying to plug the possible regulatory arbitrage and encourage banks to have rated exposures. So the Reserve Bank is trying to change this. They want to reduce the number of large rated exposures in the banking industry and make it such that arbitrage will be reduced and banks will have rated exposures. Banks should have rated exposures. So why did RBI take this action? The question is trying to ask us, why did RBI take this action? So statement 1, to more accurately assess the credit risk associated with unrated exposures. So raising the risk was a step towards plugging possible regulatory arbitrage and encouraging banks to have rated exposures. So they actually wanted to more accurately assess, because they wanted banks to have rated exposures, the credit risk associated with unrated exposures. So all right, 1 is valid. 2, discouraging banks to give loans to unrated borrowers. So don't give loans to unrated borrowers. Again, give loans to rated borrowers only. Only likha nahi hai. In the passage, they are just saying RBI is plugging the gap. So this is what RBI will pursue. 3 says exposure of large domestic systematically important banks to unrated exposures. So domestic banks being exposed to unrated exposures is opposite, right? To unrated exposures. All of this is invalid. 3 is invalid. 4, to overcome the information barrier. Information barrier is outright suggested. Information barriers are created. So overcoming information barrier. So 1, 2 and 4, the correct choice here should be option C. 1, 2 and 4 only. Alright. So because of the subject of this question, this has been marked incorrect by some students because the subject I think is a little challenging. But if you look at it, RBI is basically trying to make sure कि ये unrated exposures घट जाए, large unrated exposures घट जाए और rated exposures बढ़ जाए, which will lead us to 1, 2 and 4. All right. Let's start with this. Which among the following is the root cause of the twin balance sheet problem? Right? Let's see what the twin balance sheet problem according to the passages. Make sure you are not using your own knowledge to solve any of these questions. Passage says Indian banking sector is burdened. It is burdened with high levels of NPAs, ये आपने GS में पढ़ा होगा, resulting from excessive lending to large inefficient firms that are unable to pay their loans. So the reason why high NPAs are there is told to us. So Indian banking sector is burdened. Meanwhile, corporations also face high debt levels. अब corporation के पास भी debt है, bank के पास भी debt है. So why? Because this is corporations have high debt levels leading to reduced investment, impaired profitability, which will further worsen their financial situation. So they also have, banks don't have money, industry does not have money. This leads to a vicious cycle. The issue has been compounded. This issue has become worse because of lack of political will to undertake bold structural reforms such as reducing government intervention, etc. So there isn't political will enough to tackle these problems. Addressing this twin balance sheet problem is crucial. So addressing this problem is crucial for ensuring, for reviving India's growth trajectory and ensuring long-term economic stability. So according to the author, twin balance sheet problem is जब बैंक के पास भी पैसा नहीं है, corporations के पास भी पैसा नहीं है, तो इसको ठीक कैसे करें? इसको political will से ठीक किया जा सकता है. Addressing this is important for us. All right. Let's go to the question. Which among the following is the root cause? What is the root cause of the twin balance sheet problems? So let's say D, inadequate frameworks. It's not discussed in the passage. C, low levels of investment by corporations. So low level of investment by corporation is discussed in the passage, but it's not discussed as the root cause of twin balance sheet problem. Twin में एक problem bank है और एक problem corporation है, right? So I can't say low levels of investment by corporations causes twin balance sheet problem. So C is invalid. B, government intervention in the banking sector. Intervention here, if you notice, reducing government intervention is discussed. This does not mean the government in this case, whichever government it might be. We don't have to assume that it is the current government or it is our government. Government right now is intervening, we can't say, right? The passage is saying reduce intervention, but that doesn't mean that government intervention is causing the twin balance sheet problem. So B is incorrect. A is the correct choice. Excessive lending to large inefficient firms, right? We are told high levels of NPA. Because of these high levels of NPA, these corporations also have debt to pay. So A is the correct choice for question number 70. All right. Let's look at this. Which one of the following is the most rational logical assumption? Indian banking sector is burdened with high levels of NPA. So the passage is the same. This is the second question from the passage. Option A says, we are looking for rational assumptions from this. Option A says, the twin balance sheet problem has no impact on India's growth and stability. If you notice, we are told that we must address this problem. It is crucial for us to address this problem. Okay, so no impact would be invalid. It's crucial, so it has some impact. India's political system is unwilling to address the bank sheet problem, twin balance sheet problem. So let's read this. The issue has been compounded by lack of political will to undertake bold reforms such as reducing government intervention, improving corporate governance and strengthening regulatory frameworks. So India's political system lacks the will to undertake bold structural reforms. Option B is saying India's political system is unwilling to address the twin balance sheet problems. यहाँ पे लिखा है political will with regards to bold reforms. यहाँ पे लिखा है unwilling to address. These aren't the same things. Right? This is saying that you aren't willing to take strong actions. This is saying you aren't taking any action. There is a difference. So option B is invalid. Some students I suspect would have gone with option B for this reason because it's stated here, but it's invalid. Finding bold reforms difficult to execute is what the passage is talking about. They don't want to take on that burden. But option B is saying unwilling to address matlab they are letting that problem go untouched. They are doing nothing about that problem. That we can't say from the passage. C, the twin balance sheet problem is caused by lending to large firms and corporations. Now if you look at it, the twin balance sheet problem is caused by lending to large firms and corporations. It's not option C again. Many students might pick that is because it sounds like twin balance sheet problem is caused by lending, right? But it's caused by lending in a specific way. Lending in a way where NPAs are generated. Excessive lending to large inefficient firms that are unable to repay, right? So it's the kind of lending that is done, right? It's not based on the size of the firm, but it's the kind of lending that is being done. So C is invalid. D is the correct choice. The profitability of corporations in India is currently affected by the twin balance sheet problem because we are told profitabilities, corporations also face high debt levels. This is true. If I said the profitability of corporations in India is currently unaffected. So this corporations faced high debt levels, this affects their profitability. This part would stop making sense. If I added this, which is if I'm negating इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ, I'm just adding the word not. I'm saying they are not affected या unaffected. By adding the word not, I can check this in the passage stops making sense. Right? So if I negate a valid assumption, the passage gets negated. Remember that. So D is the correct choice for this question. Alright. Let's look at question 72. Which of the following are the most logical and rational inferences that can be made from the above passage? So let's take a look at the passage first. Translocation is defined for us. Translocation or the intentional moving of species to new places. वो cheetahs को लाए, so translocation. Translocation is a strategy that is aimed at restoring degraded ecosystems or protecting endangered species. However, species may, one, struggle to adapt. Second, it can have unintended consequences such as competition, predation, etc. Translocations frequently disrupt natural genetic diversity. So 3 or 4 negative outcomes of translocations have been discussed. But then the author says, careful planning, monitoring and evaluation are essential. If we do these things, then translocations can be successful. Right? They can be successful in achieving their conservation goals while minimizing negative ecological impacts. So according to the author, there is a way that translocations can be made successful in a way where conservation goals are met and negative ecological impacts are minimized. Alright. Let's look at rational inferences. Let's start with statement 1. For translocations to be successful, looking at the genetic diversity of the ecosystem is essential. So how do I ensure careful planning, monitoring, evaluation is essential to ensure translocations are successful? Before that, the author is saying, however, it's an inference question. Remember, we have to use other facts. Valid facts stated in the passage. We need to use those valid facts stated in the passage to draw another conclusion. That would be an inference. So here, unintended consequences such as predation, competition with native species, right, and the spread of disease with native species. So for translocations to be successful, looking at the genetic diversity of the ecosystem is essential. Otherwise, native species will be negatively impacted. So option 1 is valid. We need to check the genetic diversity. Option 2, the diseases carried by a specific species can impact new ecosystems adversely. So the diseases carried by a species can impact new ecosystems adversely. This is stated that it will have unintended consequences such as spread of disease. So valid inference. 3, translocation should be especially used when benefits outweigh the risks. So in the end, the author says you need to carefully plan. You need to check, you need to monitor, you need to check the natural genetic diversity, you need to check all of these factors. So all these factors are essentially talking about translocation should be especially used when benefits outweigh the risks. If we find that there is a benefit, if we find that we can achieve, let me clear all this, we can achieve conservation goals while minimizing negative ecological balances, only then should we engage in applying this solution of translocation. So the right choices 1, 2 and 3, right? Why is 4 invalid? Translocation should only be used as a last resort when all other conservation methods have failed. This has not been stated in the passage, that it should only be used as a last mile, like a last minute thing, right? So option 4 is invalid, nowhere discussed in the passage. Option C is the correct answer. Let's see the next one. Alright, the author of the passage would most likely agree with which one of the following? Now, let's go through this. Those who insist on literacy as a test and insist upon making it a condition precedent to enfranchisement, in my opinion, commit 2 mistakes. So the author is saying if you use literacy as a test for enfranchisement, which is voting, right? If you use it as a test for voting, then you make 2 mistakes. First mistake is the belief that an illiterate person is necessarily an unintelligent person. The second mistake is literacy necessarily imports a high level of intelligence or knowledge. So these are the 2 negative outcomes of putting a test for voting as literacy being the test for voting. Alright. Which option could be correct? We'll just go through this. Option A, illiterate people are just as intelligent as literate people. So the author is not trying to suggest that they are equally intelligent. This is not stated in the passage. They may be equally intelligent, they may not be equally intelligent, but it is not stated in the passage. Alright. So A is invalid. B, literacy should never be considered as a requirement for voting or any other important rights. So literacy should never be considered as a requirement for voting or any other important rights. This is definitely invalid. The author is not talking about any other rights. The author is just restricting himself to voting. Option D, literate people are usually more knowledgeable or intelligent than illiterate people. More knowledgeable is opposite of what is stated in the passage, so completely invalid. Option C is the right choice, which says insisting on literacy as a requirement for voting is unfair and ineffective. Unfair because statement 1, believe that illiterate person is necessarily unintelligent, this is unfair. Second is literacy necessarily imports higher level of intelligence or knowledge than what an illiterate person possesses, but this is not true. This is what that option is, this is what the statement is trying to indicate. So since it's not true, it's inefficient also. Alright. So 3, insisting on literacy as a requirement for voting is unfair, and like I just said, it's ineffective, inefficient. It won't work as a concept. So option C is the correct choice for this question. Alright. So that covers all our questions in our ANUBHAV test. If you notice, I'll just quickly categorize the kind of questions. This is about author's agreement. So you can say further application, inference question, assumption question. Again, another, this is just a fact-based question from the same passage. This wasn't as, let's say, possible reasons for RBI to raise the risk weights. This is actually an inference based question, But this wasn't asked like an inference based question. This is asked like a almost like a factual interpretation question. Okay. This is a straightforward assumption question, inference question, most supported by the author, another most valid implication. Just a moment. Right? Most logical corollary we have discussed. Best sums up we have discussed. We have discussed most rational practical implications, crucial message. All right. Assumptions have been discussed. This is the paragraph. So this was an inference based question, like I told you. This was also an inference based question. This was an assumption based question. Implication, which is also an inference based question. Just a moment. Author statement, implication, followed by another implication question, and these are inference, main idea. All right. So right, I wanted to show you those questions to point out these few things. So we have discussed in today's ANUBHAV test inference questions, assumption questions, summary questions, main point questions, and you can add one or two types but they are subsets of inference question type, right? These are the questions that are basically asked by UPSC, right? There is the exact kind of questions that are asked by UPSC. The reason why I'm telling you this is keep a track of what your accuracy is for each question type. It can help you take informed decisions in the exam when you are facing a set of questions, whether you want to solve one question or maybe skip that question. All right. So with this, I'll bring our discussion to an end. Thank you, everyone. All the best.